"I'll never leave you." He said it softly, with his hand wrapped around mine. His eyes didn't blink when he spoke, as if saying it with enough certainty could make it true. And for a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I was already gone. Not physically, not yet, but inside. My soul had been retreating for months. Piece by piece, moment by moment, I had been slipping away quietly, invisibly, while he kept promising me forever. He thought forever was about presence, but forever to me had already ended. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And that was exactly where I lived. I wasn't alone. His body was there, his voice was there, his promises were there. But I couldn't speak what mattered. I couldn't share the truth that my heart was exhausted, that my spirit was tired, that my love had run out of places to land. And so I was lonely in the one place I should have felt most seen. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed while already gone? Have you ever smiled at someone across the table while silently grieving a love that no longer lived inside you? If you have, tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, because if you've ever left on the inside before you left on the outside, you know this story. The hardest part of promises is not that they're broken, it's that they're spoken to a version of you that no longer exists. When he said, "I'll never leave you," he wasn't lying. He meant it. But he didn't see that the person he was speaking to wasn't really there anymore. And how could I explain that? How do you tell someone, "I love you," but the me who loved you the way you need, she's already gone? So I stayed. I nodded. I smiled. I held his hand back. I let the world believe we were unbreakable. And inside, I drifted further and further away. That's the irony of love sometimes. People can promise you forever, but forever is meaningless if your soul has already left the room. Promises have weight, and his promise, "I'll never leave you," was heavy. At first, it felt like safety, like something solid I could hold on to in a world that so often felt uncertain. But over time, it became something else. It became a chain. Because the truth was, he kept promising to stay, while I was already slipping away. The slow departure doesn't happen all at once. It's not a grand exit, it's a quiet unraveling. It starts with the small silences, with the conversations that no longer matter, with the moments where your laughter feels rehearsed instead of real, with the way your body stiffens under a touch that used to make you melt. Little by little, the connection fades. The outside world sees two people still standing side by side, but inside, one of them is already gone. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And that was my truth. I didn't want to see the reality of what was happening because seeing it meant I had to feel it, and feeling it meant I had to face the fact that I was no longer in love. So I distracted myself with his promises. "I'll never leave you." He repeated it so often, almost like a mantra. And I nodded, smiled, pretended those words meant something to the part of me that had already checked out. But my soul knew. My soul was already halfway out the door, even while my body stayed. Let me ask you, have you ever been there? Have you ever felt yourself slowly leaving, even while your body stayed? Have you ever heard the promises and felt the ache of knowing they were too late? That's the pain of the slow departure. No one else sees it. Not even the person you're with, but you know. And the knowing eats at you, piece by piece, until there's almost nothing left inside to give. I stayed for appearances. I stayed for the comfort of routine. I stayed because leaving felt too final, too cruel, too impossible. But every day I stayed, I disappeared a little more. That's the paradox of love. Sometimes people stay physically present long after their hearts have gone, and sometimes promises aren't broken, they're just irrelevant, because he promised he'd never leave, but I had already left. The emptiness of staying is a kind of loneliness no one warns you about, because on the outside, you're still together. You share a bed, meals, friends, holidays. The world looks at you and sees a couple, but inside, you know you're alone. I remember lying next to him at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. He was right there, warm, steady, close, but I felt like I was on another planet. The silence between us wasn't restful. It was suffocating. And in that silence I realized the truth. My body was here, but my soul had already left. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And that was exactly it. The things that mattered most, the ache, the truth, the emptiness. I couldn't say them. Or maybe I didn't want to, because I already knew he wouldn't understand. So I swallowed my truth. And every time I did, I disappeared a little more. That's what the emptiness of staying does to you. It doesn't just keep you lonely. It erases you. You learn to smile when you want to cry. You learn to nod when you want to scream. You learn to stay quiet, because speaking only makes the silence heavier, and slowly you lose yourself. I think the saddest part was realizing that he didn't even notice. He thought everything was fine, because I kept playing my part, I kept showing up, I kept existing beside him, even though I was gone within me. Let me ask you, have you ever been there? Have you ever stayed in a relationship long after your heart had left? Have you ever pretended to be present when deep down you were already somewhere else? That's the truth I had to face. That staying when you're already gone doesn't save the relationship. It only kills you slowly. And yet I stayed. I stayed because leaving felt like failure. I stayed because his promises sounded easier than my truth. I stayed because the world thought we were solid, and I didn't want to break that illusion. But the emptiness of staying isn't safety. It's surrender. Not surrender to love, but surrender of self. And I had surrendered too much already. Every story like this has a breaking point, a moment when silence becomes too loud, when pretending becomes unbearable, when staying becomes impossible. For me, it wasn't an argument. It wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't even his words. It was me, finally listening to the voice I had silenced for too long. One evening, we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The food was there, the wine was poured. He scrolled through his phone, distracted, comfortable, and I watched him, realizing that the version of me who once begged for his attention no longer existed. Something inside me whispered, "It's already over. Even if he stays, it's over." Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And in that moment, I understood. I didn't have to keep becoming the version of me who disappeared to keep the peace. I could choose something else. I could choose myself. That was my breaking point, not loud, not messy, quiet, clear, final. It was the night I admitted that even if he never left me, I couldn't come back to him, because I was already too far gone inside. That's the truth people don't talk about. Sometimes the ending doesn't happen when one person walks out. Sometimes the ending happens long before, when one person walks away internally, silently, invisibly. Let me ask you, have you ever felt that moment? The one where you realized you could never go back, even if you stayed? It's a strange kind of grief. You mourn a relationship that technically still exists. You mourn a love that technically hasn't ended. But you know, deep down, it's already gone. And once you know, you can't unknow. I didn't leave that night, not physically. I smiled, I washed the dishes, I got ready for bed. But something shifted. The pretending ended. The waiting ended. The illusion ended. That was the night I stopped hoping, and once hope is gone, there's nothing left to hold you. He promised he'd never leave, and in the end, he didn't. He stayed. His body was there. His voice was there. His routines, his habits, his presence, it was all still there. He kept his promise, but the promise didn't matter anymore, because by the time he was clinging to forever, I was already gone inside. And that's the truth about love that no one tells you. Sometimes the leaving happens long before the door ever closes. Sometimes the goodbye is spoken silently in your soul, while your mouth is still smiling, while your body is still staying. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And that's why I had to go. Not because he left me, but because I had left myself. I had stayed too long in a space where I couldn't speak my truth, too long in a relationship where my soul had no room, too long pretending presence was the same as love, and leaving inside, that was the beginning of coming back to myself. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't betrayal, it was simply the truth. I realized I couldn't come back to life if I kept disappearing for someone else's comfort. I couldn't feel whole if I kept clinging to a promise that meant nothing to the part of me that mattered most, my soul. So I let go, quietly, gracefully, completely. And here's what I learned. Sometimes the bravest leaving is the one no one sees, the one that happens inside first. The one that makes space for you to return to yourself long before you ever walk away physically. Because real love doesn't demand you abandon yourself to keep it alive. Real love doesn't silence your soul. Real love doesn't need you to disappear. So yes, he kept his promise. He never left. But I did. And leaving inside was the first step to coming home. Tell me in the comments, have you ever left a relationship on the inside long before the outside caught up? I want to hear your story. Subscribe if this spoke to you, because here we don't confuse promises with presents. We talk about the truth of love, loss, and coming back to yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leaving inside isn't weakness. Sometimes it's survival. And I'll leave you with Jung's words one last time. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. I chose to become someone who could no longer disappear for the sake of a promise. I chose to become someone who could return to herself. I chose to leave inside so I could finally live outside.